Alrighty, here we are, Games of the Year 2020. I gotta say that I mentioned something in Games of the Year 2019 that caught me a little off guard when I was rewatching it. And it was that 2020 was gonna be a fun year. Well, joke's on all of us, because 2020 turned out to be an interesting year, to say the least. And that kind of leads me into my game of the year here, because there were two games that were vying for this spot. And it was kind of a struggle to choose between them. But I ended up choosing for my game of the year, that being a game that released in 2020, and that's going to be Fae Tactics, an indie game. Can you believe it? An indie game becoming my game of the year? I can't believe it. Fae Tactics really caught me off guard, primarily because indie games have a stigma for me. Ultimately, they're just not that great, in my opinion. There are definitely gems, there are definitely diamonds in the rough, but the market is so saturated with games that I'm not interested in that it kind of makes me write off the entire category, basically. But Fae Tactics, I loves me some tactics games. And I played the demo of this for my E3 2020 demo showcase, or something like that. And I had a great time with it. I had a fantastic time with it. And I just had to get my hands on it. So I played it in 2020, towards the end of I played it. And holy cow, was this game fantastic. It has a really creative implementation of its mechanics. It kind of takes this approach of, we want to be a menu-less tactics game. And that works in some areas, it works less well in other areas, but it was an approach that I'd never seen before, and it actually benefited my experience of the game. I found myself kind of confronted with great mechanics, and the story, it caught me off guard, I'll say. It may seem unremarkable, but because the gameplay is so fantastic, it kind of pushes you through, and you might be pleasantly surprised at where the game takes you. The game as a whole was just a great deal of fun. And there was a crazy amount of customization in the game as well that I really wasn't expecting. You could honestly say that a game like Fae Tactics lacks in a lot of departments that other great tactics games out there have, but the customization is actually there. You gotta look at it in a different way. And that's kind of what makes Fae Tactics a super cool game, is that it's not traditional. It's arguably innovative. It does something different, and it makes you look at that different thing or familiar things in a different way. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But yeah, that's my game of the year for 2020. Fae Tactics, an indie game. Can you believe it? I can't believe it. My favorite game that I played this year, this is not restricted by games that have released in 2020, it's just any game that I played. This was the second game vying for the Game of the Year slot, and that is Final Fantasy VII Remake. Holy cow, was I incredibly surprised by this game. I initially played Final Fantasy VII to just get familiar with the game. I wanted to play it, and then I wanted to see where Final Fantasy VII took the game based off of what I already played. And I was not expecting what I got. There's so many aspects of Final Fantasy VII Remake that can be arguably called flawless in my eyes. I had a ton of fun with the combat. There were so many little design decisions and tweaks that were made to the formula that improved my gaming experience so much. Like, just how they did materia was fantastic. How they did weapons was fantastic. I loved it. There was a bit of traversing that I really wasn't expecting, And there was character development for characters that I didn't even remember. And they became some of my favorite characters in the game. It's kind of crazy to think about that a character you don't even remember from the original game, even though you played it like just a couple months ago, that character ends up being one of your favorites. I couldn't believe it. The way the game is approached is also very interesting, because obviously Final Fantasy VII is a decently sized game. And obviously, Final Fantasy VII Remake is going to be in parts. So the way they decided to break it up is a very interesting aspect of it, because I spent a lot of hours, I think 40 hours on the game. And the fact that it's basically just Midgar is pretty insane. There's just so much to do in that game. And there's so many places that the game takes you that I couldn't help but just be floored by how much I liked the game and how much I wanted more of it. Final Fantasy VII Remake is definitely a game worthy of being my favorite game played throughout the entirety of 2020. Loved it a lot. When it comes to my most disappointing game that I played this year, I had a little bit of a struggle with this, mostly because I really didn't play a whole lot of games that I would really consider disappointing. You know, there were some games that I wasn't expecting what I got. I mean, and I wasn't expecting much, like Transistor, for example. I wasn't expecting the game that I got, and the way the game it was delivered to me was not. No, not at all. But I really wouldn't consider that disappointing for me. Like, I wasn't expecting that game to give me a certain type of feeling, or I wasn't expecting anything out of it, basically. But ultimately, I actually ended with Stardew Valley as my most disappointing game played in 2020. If you really want more in-depth reasons, I really suggest you go watch my Stardew Valley Axelrod watches Axelrod, because I get more into specifics with that. But I guess just to keep it short and sweet, the game wasn't what I thought it would be. I have what I would consider, I guess, a past with these farming games. Like, I played some Harvest Moon games and I really enjoyed those games, but I think my nostalgia might have influenced the way I view those games, because when I went into Stardew Valley, I didn't feel any of that nostalgia. Everything that I encountered really wasn't giving me aspects that I would have enjoyed. It could also be that a lot of the outside influences, such as other people's opinions about the game, might have increased or upped what the game is supposed to be like. So when I got into it, combined with how I was playing the game and what everybody was saying about the game, I wasn't actually getting the experience that they got. And so that might have downed it a peg, but that wasn't the reason that I ended up being disappointed by it. It was just the actual content in the game ended up being disappointing. And I think that just harkens back to my nostalgia for farming games like Harvest Moon. I felt like I wanted something like that, and I didn't get anything in that range or that vein. So I think Stardew Valley is going to be my most disappointing game played in 2020. There were some considerations for Trails of Cold Steel 4. I can't elaborate on that because spoilers, but you can go watch my thoughts video. Suikoden 3 was also a choice there, but I ended up not finishing that game. I have some plans to go back to it, but I think I'm going to stick with Stardew Valley for this one. Now, for honorable mentions for my favorite games that I've played this year, these were basically games that could have been in contender for my favorite game played this year or game of the year that just, narrowly missed the spot. And the first one is The Dungeon of Nahublek, the Amulet of Chaos. I play Dungeons and Dragons, or at least I used to. I haven't played it in several years now, but I'm looking to get back into it. And this game is a parody on Dungeons and Dragons, and it works so well. I was laughing, I was having a good time, and it wasn't a game that I just needed to take seriously. It was a game where I could just sit back and laugh at the jokes and enjoy a well-written, like, D&D campaign of sorts. It was just a ton of fun to experience. It's a nice little tactical game that takes a simple approach, but has a decent bit of complexity to it. I really liked the mechanics of the Dungeon of Nahublek. And I'm just gonna throw it out there that I have no idea how to say that. It's a joke in the game that like every character mispronounces Nahubuk or Nahubek. And you know, it's just, if the game is making fun of itself, you know that the game is going in the right direction. I was just pleased a great deal with this game. Now, the next honorable mention that I have is Operencia: The Stolen Sun. This game, ooh-wee, this game is amazing. I don't normally gravitate towards dungeon crawlers, specifically like first-person dungeon crawlers. I've played one or two in my lifetime, and it's just not my thing. You know, I've seen some people play it, and it's just not my thing. But Operencia is slightly different, mostly because it's also harkening back to D&D campaign. And because it has so many similarities with that, I found myself so engaged with the story. And I actually found that the combat was really enjoyable as well. There's a little bit of, you know, complexity and a little bit of strategy involved that really kind of pulled me in. And once I got my hands on the game, I just found myself wanting to play it more and more. It was such a fantastic experience, and I dislike very little about the game. I greatly enjoy the characters, the voice acting, the writing, the music, the story. It was just all done so well. And I can't praise that game enough. It's highly recommended from me if that's your style of game. Operencia: The Stolen Sun was 100% a contender for favorite game played this year. And, you know, if Final Fantasy VII Remake didn't come out, it might have been right there. The next game that I have, this one's gonna be a little bit of a shocker here, and that's Socrates Jones, Pro Philosopher. This is a Flash game, all right? This game was recommended to me by Heels. Socrates Jones, if you're not familiar with it, is basically an Ace Attorney game. The lawyer guy, Objection, you know. He basically goes around and he solves like lawyer cases and things like that. And Socrates Jones takes that formula and does its own game with it. The difference though is in Ace Attorney, you have investigations. And in my opinion, those slow down the game quite a bit. Whereas in Socrates Jones, it is just the court cases basically, or in this case, just debates. That was one of the more fantastic things about this game because, you know, you just get straight into the meat of it. Aside from that, everything else about the game was just absolutely phenomenal. There were fantastic characters, the story was actually quite nice, and I would say the topics of what was being debated was actually incredibly insightful. There were a ton of people that I had never heard of before with different viewpoints on the world, and all of those viewpoints were incredibly insightful and kind of makes you think about the state of our world right now and how things can be improved if people would actually not necessarily take those viewpoints as their own, but kind of take them into account and say, like, if I looked at this situation like this person's viewpoint, how much better of a situation or conversation will I have? It's really a game that gets you to think, you know? I don't think there's anything unlikable about the game for me. It's just incredibly interesting, incredibly fun, and it's very relatable to the world as it is, just to, I guess, transpose what's going on, whereas what's being discussed in the game, it's not like a topical thing, you know, like this came out in like 8 years ago or something like that, but it's a very interesting talk about philosophy, basically. And if that doesn't sound interesting to you, just give it a shot. It's incredible. The last game for the honorable mentions is Cyberpunk 2077. Could be a little bit of a surprise for you, but you know, it was one of my most anticipated games of 2019. And I ended up playing it on release day, and I ended up enjoying it a bunch. I played it on PC, and I had a good time with some of the bugs and things like that, but I had an even greater time with just the game in general. It was essentially what I was looking for. I wanted Deus Ex mashed up with Mass Effect, and that's exactly what I got. I got a futuristic world where I'm playing a protagonist, and that protagonist is making choices, and those choices are doing X, Y, and Z. You know, it's exactly what I wanted, and it's a fantastic game for what it does. It has a great cast of characters. The side quests are some of the best side quests I've ever done. It does side quests in a slightly different way than you might be familiar with. And some of those side quests are arguably bigger and better than the main story. And that's some high praise, because the main story is actually, you know, well, pretty good. I had a great time with Cyberpunk 2077. There's a lot of stuff to do in the game. If you're a completionist, you're probably going to be on that game for 100 plus hours potentially. And the second playthrough that I have planned for this game is definitely in the future. Cyberpunk 2077 came out with some negative buzz, but at least I can say from my experience, I enjoyed it a great deal, and I don't regret buying it. I don't regret playing it. It was phenomenal. Now, for my most anticipated games of 2021, this one was a little bit of a struggle for me because I have a lot of games that have no release date. There's 2 games on my list that have a release date in 2021. So I'm just kind of going with the wind here and hoping that these games come out in 2021. But the first one is going to be Horizon Forbidden West. This game is a sequel to Horizon Zero Dawn, and I liked Horizon Zero Dawn. The game was really good. It is so different from what I'm used to. It's like a Native American game with robots, you know? It's so cool. So I have no idea where Forbidden West is going to take us. I don't remember much about Horizon Zero Dawn, but I'm very excited to see where the game goes because the first game was absolutely amazing. The next game is an indie game, actually, and it's Eldest Souls. I played this for my E3 2020 demo showcase, and I think it was 2 bosses, I believe, and holy cow, this is what I want from a Dark Souls game. It's basically a boss rush type of game. There's no trash mobs as far as I know. There's no annoying backtracking as far as I know. It's just go in, fight this incredibly difficult boss, beat it, and then go and find another incredibly difficult boss and beat that. I just had a great time with it. Like, some of those bosses are insane. And I mean insane. Like, there's just so much stuff going on. You gotta remember this, and then it reverses. Whew. Eldest Souls. It was the game that I never thought I would like, but ended up enjoying it a great deal. And now it's one of my most anticipated games. The last game is Scarlet Nexus. Now, I don't actually know a whole lot about this game. Honestly, it might be better to say that I know nothing about this game, but I've seen a few trailers of it, and it looks interesting to me. It looks like an anime Astral Chain or something like that. It's an anime action game of some sort. I don't know, it just looks right up my alley, I guess. There's nothing about it that screams, you should stay away from this game, it's not for you. No, obviously I'm gonna keep my eye on it, but the game just, I don't know. There's something alluring about it that's pulling me in and saying, you know, you might want to keep an eye on this one. This one's right up your alley. So I'm keeping an eye on that, and I'm hoping that it turns out to be a game that I want to play, because so far it looks great. But that is all that I got for Games of the Year 2020. This has been a little bit of a crazy year in regards to gaming. Hopefully we got more games on the horizon, and hopefully more games to anticipate for the future. So thanks for watching, appreciate it. See you on the next video. Peace.